Welcome to Alien Watchers, where we dive into the most thrilling sci-fi tales and explore the universe like never before. Today, we follow the incredible journey of humanity's struggle for survival and the unexpected alliance formed with the Kelari to face an even greater threat, the Varkan. Stay tuned as we uncover the secrets of this epic battle for the future. The Kelari Confederation had long prided itself on its unmatched military superiority. With vast fleets, advanced weaponry, and a reputation for ruthlessness, they had crushed countless civilizations across the galaxy. But when they descended upon Terra Prime, humanity's homeworld, they found something unexpected. It began at the Proxima Centauri B system, a small yet strategically important location in the Milky Way. The Kelari forces, certain of their swift victory, initiated the invasion with typical Kelari efficiency. Their enormous warships appeared like blackened storm clouds against the starry expanse, sending a wave of panic throughout humanity. The first wave of bombers rained down on the unsuspecting cities of Terra Prime, the sheer force of the assault shaking the very foundations of the planet. But then, something strange happened. The Kelari expected human cities to crumble under the onslaught, their governments to panic, and their military forces to falter in the face of superior technology. What they didn't anticipate was that humans, underestimated as primitive by their alien conquerors, had been preparing for this moment long before the first shot was fired. At the front lines, General Althea Renner, a battle-hardened leader of the human resistance, had already anticipated every move the Kelari would make. Her people had faced the threat of war for decades, building weapons in secret, testing unconventional tactics in the depths of their oceans, and researching technologies that would allow them to pierce through the impenetrable defenses of the Kelari fleet. The first shock came when the human-made energy disruptors, a newly developed technology that harnessed the raw power of Terra Prime's volatile magnetic fields, began to fire at the Kelari ships. The ships that had once been invincible now began to sputter and flicker in the darkened void of space. The Kelari's shields, normally impervious to all but the most devastating attacks, were no match for the strange energy pulses that hummed through the atmosphere. But it wasn't just the technology. The human military, typically seen as a fragmented and poorly coordinated force, proved themselves to be shockingly agile. They adapted to every maneuver the Kelari made, countering with precision and resourcefulness. Fighter jets, once deemed outdated in the face of Kelari firepower, swooped in with incredible speed, lacing their enemies' ships with laser fire before disappearing into the darkness of space once again. In the control room of the flagship Kelari warship, Admiral Tarlin sat frozen as the reports flooded in. His tactical mind raced, struggling to comprehend how the humans had managed to not only defend their world, but had done so with such ingenuity. The data from his battle systems displayed the impossible. Humans were using hit-and-run tactics, employing guerrilla warfare with weaponized asteroids, and sabotaging Kelari systems with unexpected ease. "This is not possible," Tarlin muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the chaos. The Kelari were known for their indomitable will and superior intellect, yet here they were, struggling to contain the tenacious human resistance. Across the battlefield, humanity's leaders had no intention of backing down. General Renner, standing at the front of her forces, watched as the human-made interceptors flew in perfect formation, strategically picking off the weakened Kelari ships. She knew that victory was still far from guaranteed, but she had one thing her alien invaders did not: the ability to adapt and overcome. As the battle raged on, a single message was sent to the Kelari fleet from the humans: "We are not afraid, we will not be conquered." The Kelari had underestimated humanity, and now they were facing the most dangerous thing they could imagine: a force willing to fight with every last breath, equipped with the ability to learn, to grow, and to outsmart them. The first battle at Proxima Centauri B ended in a stunning victory for humanity, but the true test was only beginning. The Kelari Confederation would have to rethink their entire strategy, for they had just encountered something they had never seen before. A species capable of turning their own weaknesses against them, a species that would never give up, no matter the odds. The defeat at Proxima Centauri B sent shockwaves through the Kelari Confederation. Their fleets, once feared throughout the galaxy, had been humiliated by a species they had deemed primitive. As they regrouped and analyzed the battle, they began to search for answers. Answers that would lead them to understand how humans had achieved such an extraordinary feat. On the capital ship of the Kelari war fleet, the High Command convened for an urgent meeting. Admiral Tarlin, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, called for an in-depth analysis of the human enemy. "We underestimated them," Tarlin said grimly, his voice steady but filled with frustration. "We thought they were nothing more than chaotic, emotional beings, fragile in their nature, but they are something else entirely." Seated around him were some of the brightest minds in the Kelari military, including the Confederation's chief science officer, Lyra. Her role was to study the inner workings of their enemies and provide insights that would help turn the tide of the war. "Admiral," Lyra began, her voice calm and precise, "what we're seeing is not just raw aggression. Humanity has something deeper, an ability to innovate under pressure, a kind of primal brilliance. We call it adaptability, a survival instinct so deeply ingrained that they can turn even the most desperate of situations into opportunities." The room fell silent as the implication of her words sank in. The Kelari were a technologically advanced species, yes, but their success had always been rooted in the ability to apply overwhelming force to subjugate and conquer without much resistance. Humans, however, had turned the tables on them by exploiting their own weaknesses. Lyra continued, her tone now more analytical. "Their minds are not bound by the conventional frameworks of warfare. They can develop entirely new technologies on the fly, combining what they already know with creative, often unorthodox methods. Their instinct for survival is their greatest weapon." The Kelari had long valued logic, order, and precision. They prided themselves on their efficiency, yet they had failed to account for the wild unpredictability of human ingenuity. It was something that defied logic, something that could not be planned for or prepared against. Admiral Tarlin nodded slowly. "So they anticipate threats before they even exist. They don't wait for danger to strike. They create solutions first and deal with consequences later." Lyra paused, tapping her fingers thoughtfully on the table. "Exactly. It's a form of proactive defense, something no other species has been capable of on this scale. They think differently from us, which is why their tactics are so effective. They see possibilities where we see impossibilities." Meanwhile, on Earth, General Althea Renner stood in front of a massive war map in a dimly lit command center, studying the Kelari's every move. She had seen it, their arrogance, their belief that they were unstoppable. And that had been their fatal mistake. Now, humanity was in the midst of a rapid transformation. What had started as a response to the invasion was now a movement of innovation and unity. Humanity's scientists, engineers, and military leaders were working together like never before. The battle had been the catalyst for a massive leap forward in technology, one that would change the course of history. The war against the Kelari had triggered a worldwide effort to pool resources, create new weapons, and strategize a future where humanity could defend itself, not just against the Kelari, but against any threat in the universe. Renner's mind raced as she considered the consequences of their victory. "We can't let this be a fluke," she thought. "We must become something they can't predict. We must evolve faster than they can." The human resistance, once a ragtag collection of militia and civilians, had now transformed into a well-oiled, highly adaptable force. Renner knew that it was only a matter of time before the Kelari regrouped and attacked again, but this time, humanity would be ready. Their ingenuity had unlocked doors they had never before dared to open, and the key to their survival lay not in brute strength, but in their ability to think, adapt, and overcome. Back in the Kelari High Command, Lyra's face darkened as she looked at the latest intelligence reports. "They're already advancing," she murmured. "They're evolving faster than we imagined. If we don't act now, we may lose this war before we can even begin." Tarlin turned to her, his eyes hardening. "Then we must find their weakness and we must exploit it before they do the same to us." The battle for the future had only just begun, and the Kelari, for the first time in their long history, were facing a foe that could not be easily controlled or destroyed. Humanity was no longer a species to be overlooked. It had become something far more dangerous, a force that could not be predicted, a force that was always evolving. As the aftermath of the Battle of Proxima Centauri B settled, both sides found themselves at a crossroads. For the Kelari, it was a moment of reckoning, a realization that humanity was not the weak, primitive species they had once assumed. For humanity, it was a chance to fully confront the cost of their survival and what they were truly capable of when pushed to the brink. In the newly established war room, General Althea Renner stared at the holographic map of the galaxy, her eyes narrowed in concentration. The human forces had managed to secure a hard-won victory, but she knew the war was far from over. The Kelari had tasted defeat, but their arrogance and technological might were not easily erased. The next assault would come. She was certain of it. Humanity's best chance now lay in pushing the boundaries of their ingenuity even further. But at what cost? "General," came the voice of Colonel Rico Ashford, her most trusted advisor, pulling her from her thoughts. "We've been given a temporary reprieve, but we both know it won't last. The Kelari will regroup, and when they do, we'll need more than just creative defenses. We'll need an edge." Renner looked at her colleague, her lips tightening in a rare moment of vulnerability. "We have the edge, Rico, but it's not in our weapons. It's in our minds." Her statement wasn't just philosophical, it was the core of what had made humanity different, what had allowed them to survive where others might have perished. It was an instinctive drive to evolve, to adapt, and to survive at all costs. And that drive, as the Kelari would soon learn, was the true weapon of the human race. Elsewhere in the galaxy, on the Kelari flagship Treshon, Admiral Tarlin watched the latest transmission from his intelligence division. His brow furrowed as the information trickled in. Human industry had surged in the weeks following their loss. Factories that had once produced meager supplies were now churning out weapons and ships at an alarming rate. The intelligence reports also revealed something even more unsettling. Human morale was higher than ever. "They don't even seem to understand the concept of surrender," Tarlin muttered under his breath. "This is more than resistance. This is an entire species bent on survival." At that moment, Dr. Yella Voss, the Kelari's leading psychological analyst, stood beside him, scanning the data. She spoke carefully, her tone colder than usual. "It is not just resistance, Admiral. It's something far deeper. Humanity, when threatened, does not simply fight. It evolves. They are constantly recalibrating, reimagining their approach. They believe they are in a state of constant crisis, always looking for ways to outsmart their enemies before the battle even begins." Her words rang true, and for the first time, Tarlin felt a twinge of doubt. The Kelari, for all their power, were driven by order and structure, traits that had served them well in the past. But what they hadn't accounted for was humanity's unpredictable nature, a nature not bound by tradition or formula. "We've spent centuries mastering the art of conquest," Tarlin reflected, his voice growing softer, "and yet we've never faced an enemy like this." Meanwhile, Dr. Julian Kane, a leading strategist and diplomat within the human resistance, was preparing for what could be a pivotal moment in the ongoing conflict. He had sent word to Renner, urging a more forceful approach to the next round of negotiations with the Kelari. The time had come, he believed, to push beyond diplomacy and show the true face of humanity's desperation. "Enough games?" Kane said, standing tall before the Council of Resistance leaders. "The Kelari have shown us they will never understand our peaceful overtures. It's time for a new message. We stop pretending we are civilized." The room went silent. General Renner glanced at Kane, her steely gaze unwavering. She had always believed in diplomacy, in finding a way to avoid escalation. But deep down, she knew that humanity's true nature was about to be laid bare for the Kelari to see. "What do you propose, Julian?" Renner's voice was quiet, but the weight of her words was unmistakable. Kane's expression hardened. "We show them that humanity is not defined by its civility. We are not just warriors. We are survivors. And when pushed, we can become something far darker than they can imagine." Renner looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing the costs of such a move. Finally, she nodded. "Then we do it. No more pretending." The finality in her voice made it clear. Humanity would no longer hide behind the mask of diplomacy. It was time to fight not just for survival, but for a future where they would not be so easily conquered. The Kelari would see humanity for what it truly was: unpredictable, ruthless, and capable of far more than anyone could have imagined. Meanwhile, on the Kelari flagship, Admiral Tarlin felt a growing unease. The human resistance had long been unpredictable, but now the true nature of humanity was beginning to unfold. They were not just a species to be conquered. They were a species that could evolve in ways the Kelari never imagined. And this, more than any weapon, would be humanity's most dangerous strength. The war had entered a new phase, one that would change the galaxy forever. The immense flagship Treshon glided silently through the vacuum of space, its sleek obsidian surface reflecting the distant starlight. Inside its cavernous command center, the Kelari High Command gathered for a debate that would determine the fate of their ongoing war with humanity. Admiral Tarlin stood at the helm, his hands clasped behind his back, his face an impassive mask. But beneath the surface, the recent events weighed heavily on him. Humanity's unexpected victory at Proxima Centauri b had shattered his confidence. The calculations had been wrong, the strategies misguided, and now the Kelari found themselves at a crossroads. The Kelari High Council was convening to discuss their next move. Seated at the long table were some of the most brilliant minds in the Confederation, strategists, scientists, and analysts. Among them was Lyra, the psychological expert who had been studying humanity's behavior since the first encounter. "Admiral," Lyra began, her voice steady but tinged with concern, "we can no longer view this as a simple military conflict. Humanity is more than just a species fighting for survival. They are adaptable in ways we haven't even begun to understand." The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled in. For the Kelari, adaptation had always been a sign of weakness. Their species valued precision, order, and overwhelming force. But humanity was different. They didn't rely on one method of attack. They learned, they adjusted, and they surprised. "They are not merely aggressive," Lyra continued. "They exhibit something I would term adaptive aggression. This isn't violence for the sake of conquest. It's violence born of necessity, a necessity to survive against an enemy that is infinitely more powerful. But this trait, their ability to innovate, to find new solutions, is what makes them dangerous." The council shifted uneasily, and the next voice to speak was that of Kresh, the war strategist. His dark eyes gleamed with intensity as he looked at Lyra. "Adaptive aggression," he repeated. "Are you implying that we are dealing with a species that can become even more dangerous the longer the war goes on?" Lyra nodded, her expression unwavering. "Exactly. The longer we engage with them, the more capable they become. Their ability to improvise new technologies, new tactics is unlike anything we've seen in a species so young. They don't fight like us. They fight to win, no matter the cost. They aren't just trying to defeat us. They are trying to outlast us." There was a long pause as the room absorbed the weight of her analysis. For the first time, the Kelari realized that they were facing an existential threat, not just a strategic one. The humans had proven their tenacity, but they had also shown something much deeper, a hunger for survival that went beyond the battlefield. "We must consider all options," Tarlin said gravely, his voice slicing through the tension. "We cannot underestimate them again. They may have won the battle at Proxima Centauri b, but that was just the beginning. What happens next depends on how we respond." His gaze turned toward the council's top military strategist, Vasix, who had been sitting silently. Known for his cold pragmatism and sharp mind, Vasix was respected for his ability to assess situations with clinical precision. Now he leaned forward, his fingers steepled together. "We have two paths before us," Vasix said, his voice low but powerful. "We can escalate the conflict, bring every fleet in our arsenal to bear, crush their resistance, and force them into submission. Or we can acknowledge that humanity poses a greater threat than we initially believed. We must adapt our strategy and find a way to neutralize them without resorting to complete annihilation." The council murmured, divided by the suggestion. Some voices rose in favor of escalation, calling for an all-out attack to crush the human resistance once and for all. Others, like Lyra and Vasix, argued that such an approach would be futile. Humanity's unpredictability made them impossible to eliminate entirely. Even if the Kelari won in a traditional sense, the cost would be catastrophic. "The real question is," Vasix continued, "what happens if we leave them alone for too long? If we give them time to regroup, to evolve even further, we risk creating an enemy that we can't defeat. The Varkan are already moving towards us. If humanity is allowed to grow stronger, they may become an even greater threat to both our civilizations. Tarlin took a deep breath, his mind racing. The Varkan were a race unlike any other, an extermination-focused species with a singular goal: complete annihilation of all life forms they deemed inferior. The Kelari had fought them in the past and barely escaped with their existence intact. If the Varkan arrived, they would need every ally they could find, and that meant finding a way to deal with humanity first. Finally, Tarlin spoke again, his voice steady but resolute. We must come to terms with the reality of this situation. Humanity is not an enemy we can easily defeat, but they are a species that can be reasoned with, if we approach them carefully. I propose we open negotiations again with new terms and seek an alliance. We must understand their true nature, and if possible, form a partnership that will help us face the Varkan threat together. Lyra raised an eyebrow, a flicker of hope in her gaze. An alliance? Are you suggesting we trust them? Tarlin met her gaze, his expression grim. We have no choice. To defeat the Varkan, we will need their creativity, their adaptability, and their sheer will to survive. We may not be able to defeat them in the traditional sense, but we can stand together, united against a common enemy. The room fell silent again, each council member lost in thought. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Kelari and humanity were on the verge of a pivotal moment, and whether as enemies or allies, their fates were now intertwined. The Kelari fleet had withdrawn to the outer reaches of the Proxima Centauri system, leaving behind the ruins of their failed invasion. But even in retreat, the Kelari remained vigilant, monitoring every move humanity made with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The intelligence reports were becoming more troubling by the day. Humanity was not only surviving, they were thriving. From the ground up, the resistance had evolved. Once fragmented and disorganized, Earth's military efforts were now a unified force, operating in seamless coordination. Cities that had been destroyed in the initial Kelari bombardment were being rebuilt at an astonishing rate, thanks to human ingenuity and resilience. Factories once dedicated to civilian production were now churning out advanced weaponry, vehicles, and ships, each design more sophisticated than the last. This is impossible, Admiral Tarlin muttered, staring at the latest intelligence report. Their industrial output has increased by nearly 400% in a matter of weeks. How are they doing this? Lyra stood next to him, reviewing the data with a calculating gaze. Humanity has a unique ability to adapt in ways we can't comprehend. When faced with a crisis, they don't just react, they innovate. It's as if they are preparing for a war that never ends, even when it seems impossible to win. Tarlin clenched his fists in frustration. The Kelari had underestimated humanity's resilience before, but now it was clear they had barely scratched the surface of their potential. The human race was evolving, and it was doing so at a pace that outstripped the Kelari's understanding of warfare. They had no precedent for such rapid development. And the more they watched, the more it became apparent that humanity was not simply preparing to defend itself. They were preparing for something greater. Meanwhile, on Earth, General Renner was overseeing the final stages of humanity's preparations. With the Kelari fleet temporarily pushed back, she knew the real test would come soon. The Kelari were regrouping, reorganizing, and they would return. But humanity had learned an invaluable lesson from their first victory. It was not enough to fight for survival. They had to fight to win. Rico, how are the new prototypes coming along? Renner asked, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the progress of humanity's latest military projects. Colonel Rico Ashford, Renner's trusted right hand, tapped a few buttons, bringing up the schematics of the new human warships and weapons. They're ready, General. We've developed a new class of stealth destroyers, smaller, faster, and equipped with the latest energy disruptors. We've also improved the electromagnetic shields to counter the Kelari's most common attack patterns. Renner's lips curled into a tight smile. Good. We won't give them the chance to underestimate us again. As they spoke, the human fleet was undergoing rigorous training exercises, preparing for the inevitable conflict. But it wasn't just about the military. Humanity's greatest strength lay in its unity. For the first time in history, The nations of Earth had set aside their differences, united by the singular goal of survival. From the ashes of war, a new global order had emerged, and with it, an unbreakable will to defend their home. In the Kelari command center aboard Treshon, Admiral Tarlin stared at the strategic simulations with a growing sense of dread. The human fleet was becoming more organized with each passing day, their tactics evolving as rapidly as their technology. Tarlin knew that a direct assault would be far more difficult this time. Humanity had learned how to fight back, and they had learned fast. "Admiral," a voice broke his thoughts. It was Vasix, the Kelari strategist. We've been watching their industrial output, and there's something we need to consider. They're not just rebuilding, they're accelerating their weapons programs. They've begun developing new technologies that could pose a direct threat to our shields, and they've advanced their spacecraft design. We've never seen anything like it before. Tarlin rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation sinking in. "How long until they're ready for combat?" Vasix consulted his data. "At this rate, in less than a month. They've already doubled their production capacity for warships. If we don't strike soon, we may find ourselves fighting a much stronger enemy." The Kelari were a proud species, but even pride couldn't shield them from the reality before them. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were becoming a formidable force, one that could change the course of the war and the galaxy. But as the tension mounted, there was one more piece of intelligence that worried Tarlin. The human resistance had begun sending signals of their own, encrypted messages that, while difficult to decipher, indicated that they weren't just preparing for war. They were preparing for something more. Tarlin turned to Lyra, his voice low and concerned. "What if they're not just preparing for us? What if there's something worse coming? Something even the humans can't handle alone?" Lyra hesitated, looking down at the data once more. "If that's the case, Admiral, then we may have underestimated humanity's foresight as well. Perhaps they're already preparing for a threat we haven't even begun to consider." As the Kelari forces debated their next move, the quiet hum of humanity's engines continued to grow louder. Humanity, once on the edge of extinction, was now on the cusp of something far greater. Their resilience had driven them to adapt and evolve at a pace no one, not even the Kelari, could have predicted. The cold expanse of space stretched out in all directions as the Kelari flagship Treshon loomed like a dark sentinel on the edge of the Proxima Centauri system. Admiral Tarlin stood at the command deck, staring out into the abyss, his mind preoccupied with the direction the war was taking. Their first defeat at the hands of humanity had been a hard pill to swallow, but the real challenge now was what to do next. Humanity had surprised them. The human resistance had learned, adapted, and improved faster than anyone could have predicted. But now a new development had shifted the balance once again. In a last-ditch attempt to avoid further escalation, the Kelari had sent out a message to the humans, a call for diplomatic negotiations. The urgency was clear. The Kelari wanted to understand the humans better and see if there was a chance for peace, or at the very least, a ceasefire to face the greater galactic threat approaching, the Varkan. Tarlin knew that the Varkan were not a force to be trifled with. Their fleet was rumored to be as vast as it was deadly, their technology designed with one singular purpose: extermination. The Kelari, who had once dominated the galaxy, now found themselves in a precarious position, caught between their own arrogance and the undeniable power of humanity. On Earth, General Althea Renner stood in the command center of the human resistance, facing the difficult decision of whether or not to engage in peace talks with the alien aggressors who had invaded their world. The scars of Proxima Centauri b still ran deep, and the memories of the destruction wrought by the Kelari were fresh in her mind. But something more pressing loomed on the horizon. The Varkan, a species of such cruelty and ruthlessness, were coming, and humanity had no choice but to consider the possibility of an alliance with the very beings they had been fighting. "We can't trust them, General," Colonel Ashford said, his voice filled with concern as he watched the message from the Kelari. "They've shown us nothing but aggression. How can we negotiate with them? What's to stop them from taking advantage of us again?" Renner looked at the transmission, the cold, calculated face of Tarlin staring back at her from the screen. "I don't know, Rico, But the Varkan are coming, and if we don't act now, we might find ourselves facing an enemy far worse than the Kelari. The decision was a difficult one. Humanity had fought to defend their world, but now the survival of Earth, and possibly the entire galaxy, was tied to the outcome of these negotiations. Renner stood up, her expression determined. We will engage in talks, but this time, we go in with our eyes wide open. I won't allow humanity to be taken advantage of again. The following days were tense as both sides prepared for the first official meeting. The humans had agreed to receive the Kelari delegation, but they made their own preparations. Weaponized drones, energy disruptors, and enhanced communication systems were in place, ready to be deployed if things took a turn for the worse. The Kelari, for their part, were no less wary. Tarlin had ordered his fleet to remain on high alert, but there was something different in his demeanor. The usual arrogance that had marked his leadership was now replaced with a sense of cautious respect, even if he would never admit it openly. The Kelari delegation, led by Tarlin, arrived at Earth in a sleek, imposing vessel that gleamed with the same obsidian sheen as the Treshan. The ship landed at a neutral site, an isolated, barren part of Earth's surface that had been carefully chosen for its lack of civilian presence. A barren landscape meant to symbolize the neutrality of the negotiations. When the Kelari delegation disembarked, they were met by a small human team. General Renner, flanked by her top advisors, stood waiting with an air of quiet strength. She had seen many battles in her life, but this was unlike any other. Today, diplomacy would be the weapon, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The Kelari approached, their towering forms in the gray light, the silence between them thick with the weight of their shared history. Tarlin's cold eyes met Renner's, a spark of something resembling acknowledgement flickering for just a moment. I never thought we'd meet like this, Tarlin said, his voice low but clear, his gaze unwavering. We didn't think we'd be negotiating with you either, Renner replied, her tone measured but firm. But the Varkan are coming, and if we don't work together, neither of our species will survive. The tension was palpable, but both leaders knew the necessity of the moment. The Varkan would be here soon, and neither side had the resources to fight them alone. Tarlen, for the first time, allowed himself to consider the possibility of a true alliance, not just a ceasefire or a temporary truce, but a partnership. The idea sat uncomfortably with him, but he couldn't ignore the reality. You make a convincing case, General, Tarlen said after a long pause. Perhaps we have more in common than we thought. Humanity's resourcefulness, their adaptability, it is impressive, but it will take more than words to convince my people that this is the right path forward. Renner nodded, her eyes never leaving his. We're not asking for trust, we're asking for survival. The Varkan don't care about our differences. They only care about extermination. The meeting continued for hours, each side presenting their terms, their doubts, and their hopes for the future. The negotiations were tense, and though there were moments of tension, both sides understood the gravity of the situation. Finally, as the sun began to set on the barren world where they stood, an agreement was made. It was tentative, fragile, but it was a beginning. Let us put aside our past, Renner said, standing tall. We fight together or we fall alone. The choice is yours. Tarlin studied her for a moment before replying. Then we fight together. The fragile peace between the Kelari and humanity had been forged, but the true test would come when the Varkan arrived. For now, the two races stood united, not by trust, but by necessity. As the Kelari delegation departed and the human leaders returned to their command centers, they knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The alliance between humanity and the Kelari had been officially formed, but the scars of the past still lingered in the hearts and minds of both sides. Trust was a fragile thing, built on necessity and mutual fear of the greater threat, the Varkan. But even as the two forces began their joint military exercises, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Humanity had agreed to aid the Kelari, but not without reservations. They knew that the Kelari had not been benevolent in their intentions. They had invaded, they had killed civilians, and they had shown no mercy. The wounds were still fresh, and General Renner's trust in Tarlen and his people was far from guaranteed. In the makeshift command center on Earth's newly established joint base, General Renner sat across from Colonel Ashford, studying the latest intelligence reports. They were preparing for a series of Varkan incursions into the Proxima Centauri system, a region now jointly patrolled by human and Kelari forces. "Rico," Renner said, her voice low and tense. "I don't trust them. I can't. No matter how much we need their technology, I can't forget the civilians they killed." Ashford nodded, his face grim. "I understand, General, but we need them. If we're going to stand any chance against the Varkan, we need their firepower, their strategic expertise." Renner's gaze hardened. "And what about our people? We can't just forget what happened, not after they nearly wiped us out at Proxima Centauri B. If we're going to fight with them, I need answers. I need to know if Tarlin and his people are willing to stand with us, or if they're still playing games with our survival." The tension between humanity and the Kelari had reached a boiling point. The war with the Varkan was looming closer, but the animosity between the two factions was undeniable. Humanity's distrust was palpable, and yet the necessity of their alliance weighed heavily on both sides. On the Kelari side, Admiral Tarlin sat in his command room aboard Treshon, looking out at the silent expanse of space. His mind was a whirlwind of doubt, regret, and determination. The alliance with humanity had been necessary, but the way it had been formed left a bitter taste in his mouth. The negotiations, the delicate balance of power, and the implicit mistrust on both sides, it all felt fragile, like a dam on the verge of breaking. He hadn't expected humanity to forgive them so easily, but the weight of their past actions gnawed at him. The destruction of Proxima Centauri B, the lives lost in the initial attack, it was something he could never undo. No matter how many battles they fought together, no matter how many times they saved each other, that history would always be there. Tarlin stood up and activated his comms, sending a secure message to Lyra, his trusted psychological advisor. The message was simple, but the words it carried were heavy. "Set up a meeting with General Renner. I need to speak with her. Alone." The rendezvous took place in a neutral zone, a barren moon orbiting a distant gas giant in the Proxima Centauri system. Both sides sent their highest-ranking officers, but the atmosphere was cold, the weight of past hostilities palpable in the tense silence that enveloped the meeting. General Renner and Admiral Tarlin stood across from each other, a respectful distance between them. The shadows of their past actions hung in the air like a thick fog, but both knew that in the face of the Varkan, their differences had to be set aside. For now. Renner broke the silence first. "Tarlin, I still don't know if I can trust you. You and your people came to our world, destroyed our cities, and killed our people. And now, here we are, fighting side by side. I need to understand why." Tarlin's gaze was steady, his tone calm but filled with the burden of leadership. "General, I cannot change the past. What happened at Proxima Centauri B will haunt me for the rest of my days. But you are right to question my motives. I stand here now not to ask for forgiveness, but to show you that we, my people and I, are capable of more. We must unite against the Varkan, or we will both be wiped out. But that cannot happen unless we trust each other." Renner's eyes narrowed, searching his face for any sign of deceit. "Trust is not something easily given, Tarlin. You may have been forced into this alliance, but I'm not convinced your people will back us when the real fight begins. You've shown us your strength, but strength alone won't win this war." Tarlin's voice softened slightly, the weight of his responsibility visible in his eyes. "I know that, and I understand why you doubt us. But I ask you, General, look at what we have accomplished together. We've exchanged knowledge, technology, and resources. We've learned from each other. I can't promise you that the Kelari are perfect, or that we will ever be free from our past, but I can promise you that we will fight side by side. We will do whatever it takes to survive, together." For a long moment, Renner said nothing. The silence was thick, but her gaze softened, just slightly. She knew he wasn't lying, not this time. There was a sincerity in his words, a desperation that mirrored her own. They were both trying to do what was right, in a world that had become increasingly uncertain. "Fine," Renner finally said, her voice steady. "But this is the last chance. After this, if you betray us, there will be no going back. Humanity doesn't forget, and we'll fight, not just to survive, but to make sure you understand that we can never be your subordinates." Tarlin gave a small nod, his posture stiffening. "Understood, and I promise, General, we will fight with you, not just as allies, but as equals." The two leaders stood in silence, the distant stars witnessing the fragile bond that had been forged. It was a bond built on necessity, but as they prepared to face the Varkan together, it was the only thing that stood between them and total destruction. As the two forces left the barren moon and returned to their respective ships, the weight of the conversation lingered. Both sides were weary, and the road ahead would be difficult, but for now, they had something they had never shared before: understanding. The stars of the Proxima Centauri system shimmered in the distance, their light reflecting off the sleek, battle-worn ships of the newly formed alliance. The human fleet, now fortified with Kelari technology, moved in synchronized formation alongside the Kelari warships, their combined forces a powerful symbol of the fragile partnership that had been forged out of necessity. It was a rare sight, human and Kelari vessels side by side, an uneasy truce held together by the looming shadow of a greater threat. General Althea Renner stood on the bridge of the human flagship Vanguard, her eyes fixed on the holoscreen that displayed the latest intelligence reports. The Varkan were getting closer, their scouts spotted just outside the outer rim of the Proxima Centauri system. Their fleet was vast, their intent clear: to exterminate, to conquer, to obliterate. "We don't have much time," Renner muttered, her voice tense with the weight of the decision that lay ahead. "If we don't act now, we won't just lose this war, we'll lose everything." Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice from behind. It was Colonel Rico Ashford, her ever-loyal right-hand officer, approaching with a new set of reports. "General, the Varkan fleet is moving fast. They're closing in on the system faster than we anticipated. Their scouts have begun to engage with our outposts along the border." Renner turned to face her, a look of determination hardening on her features. "It's time. We need to make the proposal. I'll contact Tarlin. We don't have the luxury of time to play games anymore." Ashford gave a solemn nod. "Understood, General." Meanwhile, aboard the Treshon, the flagship of the Kelari fleet, Admiral Tarlin sat in his private quarters, the dim light of the command center casting long shadows on the walls. His mind was clouded with doubt, but the situation had reached a point of no return. His people were exhausted, and the constant battle for survival had left scars far deeper than any physical wound. Tarlin's gaze was drawn to a communication terminal. It flickered to life, showing the holographic figure of General Renner. Her expression was stern, resolute. There was no time for pleasantries. "Admiral," Renner began, her voice cold but urgent, "I've come to a decision. We cannot keep fighting like this. The Varkan are coming, and they are unlike anything either of us has faced before. We need to act now, or we will lose everything." Tarlin's eyes narrowed, listening intently. This wasn't just another request for a ceasefire. It was something more. Renner continued, her tone now firm. "It's not just about stopping the Varkan. It's about securing the future for both our species. I propose that we form an official alliance, not just a temporary truce. We'll fight side by side, not as allies, but as equals. This is our only chance." Tarlin took a deep breath, the weight of her words sinking in. This was the most dangerous and bold proposal humanity had ever made. It was a leap into the unknown, an uncharted path for both their peoples. But there was no denying the truth in her words. "An alliance?" Tarlin asked, his voice filled with incredulity, but tinged with a growing sense of hope. "You're asking me to fully align Kelari forces with humanity, our fleets, our resources, our technology, all for a single purpose: to stop the Varkan." Renner met his gaze with unflinching resolve. "Yes, but we need something more than just fighting. We need to understand each other, build trust. If we can't do that, we're no better than the Varkan, fighting for survival without purpose, without unity. This war, if we win, should be a turning point, not just for the galaxy, but for both our peoples." Tarlin stood silent, the magnitude of the proposition settling over him. His people, their culture, their pride, they had always fought alone. The idea of surrendering some of that autonomy, of trusting another species so completely, felt like an impossible choice. But he could see the logic. The Varkan would not care about their differences. They would destroy both the Kelari and humanity if they could. Unity, not division, was the only path forward. "General," Tarlin began slowly, "you've been in this fight longer than any of us. Now, if you believe this alliance is the only way forward, then I will support it. But know this, we must act quickly. We can no longer afford to doubt each other. The Varkan do not wait for those who hesitate. Renner's expression softened slightly, but the resolve in her eyes remained unchanged. We will act swiftly. I'll send our combined fleets to strike first. We have one chance to catch them off guard. After that, there's no turning back. In the war rooms of both human and Kelari fleets, preparations for the joint strike were already underway. The alliance was fragile, but in the face of the Varkan threat, it was their only chance. There was no more time for hesitation or doubt. The Varkan were coming, and with their combined forces, humanity and the Kelari would fight together for survival, for victory, and for the future. The first phase of their plan was simple but daring, a surprise attack on the Varkan advance fleet. It was a risk, but one that both sides knew they had to take. The Varkan were ruthless, but they were also arrogant. They believed themselves to be invincible, just as the Kelari had once thought. It was time to show them that humanity, and now the Kelari, were not so easily defeated. As the fleets prepared to depart, General Renner addressed her united forces. This is not just a battle for Earth or for the Kelari. This is a battle for the future. If we stand together, we can turn the tide. We fight for those who cannot fight. We fight for the galaxy that will be, not the one that was. Let's make sure they never forget who we are. The human and Kelari fleets sailed into the void of space side by side, ready for the battle ahead. And though the path was uncertain, one thing was clear. They were no longer just two forces fighting for survival. They were a united front, a new hope in the galaxy. The stars stretched endlessly before them, their light shimmering as if they too were watching the approaching battle unfold. The alliance of humanity and the Kelari was no longer a fragile agreement. It had become a unified force, ready to face the Varkan and any other threat that dared challenge their existence. The warships of both fleets, side by side, now patrolled the fringes of Proxima Centauri, their sleek, advanced designs cutting through the emptiness of space like predators hunting together. General Renner stood at the helm of the human flagship Vanguard, her expression hard and determined as she surveyed the battle readiness reports. The final preparations were in place. Her forces had integrated Kelari technology, their weaponry now powered by the most advanced energy systems the galaxy had ever seen. The human fleet had never been this powerful, nor this unified with the Kelari. "Ready for the assault, General," Colonel Ashford's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've got all systems go. Varkan's scout ships are on the move and we're in position to strike." Renner nodded sharply, her eyes locked onto the view ahead. "Good. Once we engage, there's no going back. I want everyone to remember this moment. We are fighting for the future of our species, humanity and the Kelari both. If we fail here, we fail everyone." Across the galaxy, in the heart of the Kelari flagship Treshan, Admiral Tarlin stood silently in the command center, observing the united fleet on the monitors. The once formidable commander of the Kelari forces was now part of something greater. The prospect of unity, of fighting beside humanity, had grown from a distant hope into a battle-tested reality. There was no turning back. "Admiral," said Vasix, his trusted strategist, as he approached with the latest intelligence updates. "The Varkan fleet has been spotted at the edge of the system. They've deployed their advanced warships, more than we anticipated, but their arrogance has blinded them. They believe they are still untouchable." Tarlin's eyes gleamed with a sharp focus. "Then it is time to show them how wrong they are. Prepare the fleet for combat." "Yes, sir," Vasix replied. For the first time, Tarlin felt a strange sense of camaraderie. In the heat of battle, humanity had proven itself not only capable of resilience, but also of forging bonds where there was once only distrust. Now, standing with them in the face of the Varkan, Tarlin knew they had become something far greater than the sum of their parts. Together, they would become an unstoppable force. The moment of reckoning came swiftly. The Varkan fleet, massive and relentless, emerged from the dark reaches of space. Their ships, imposing and armed with devastating weaponry, were designed for one thing: extermination. The Varkan were not interested in diplomacy or negotiations. They had come to conquer, to destroy. But humanity and the Kelari, though hesitant and fragmented at the start, were now ready to face the greatest threat to their galaxy. The initial volley of fire came from the Varkan, their weapons launching with terrifying precision. The Vanguard shook under the intensity of the first attack. but its shields, now augmented by Kelari technology, absorbed the blast. Renner's fingers tightened on the command console. Return fire. Don't let them get the upper hand. The combined fleet responded in kind. Kelari warships unleashed their devastating plasma cannons, while humanity's newly integrated stealth destroyers danced through the battlefield, launching rapid strikes and disappearing into the void. The Varkan, caught off guard by the intensity and coordination of the Alliance's assault, faltered, just for a moment, but that was all they needed. Tarlin's voice crackled over the comms. General Renner, we're pushing them back. But this is only the beginning. The Varkan fleet is vast, and they're relentless. We need to hit them hard and fast. Take out their flagship. If we do, the rest of their fleet will crumble. Renner's mind raced. The Varkan were as ruthless as they were cunning, but their command structure was their weak point. If they could eliminate the leadership, the entire fleet could be destabilized. Understood. We go for the flagship. All units, focus fire on the Varkan command vessel. As the battle raged, the two fleets pushed forward with synchronized precision and laying waste to the Varkan forces with a fury that was unimaginable just weeks ago. The Kelari, once confident in their invulnerability, now found themselves working alongside the humans, sharing in the thrill of battle, united in a cause larger than either of their species. Renner's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the final phase of their strategy unfold. The Varkan flagship, an enormous fortress-like vessel, loomed ahead, its defenses buckling under the assault from both human and Kelari forces. Now, Renner shouted. The vanguard surged forward, its weapons firing in a concentrated barrage. The Kelari ships followed suit, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkness. In a final blinding explosion, the Varkan flagship was torn asunder, its massive frame crumbling into space debris. Victory! Tarlin's voice echoed over the comms, filled with disbelief and triumph. We have won. But as the debris from the flagship drifted into space, the survivors of the Varkan fleet quickly began to retreat. They were beaten, but not completely broken. Renner knew this battle was only one victory in a war that would continue for as long as the Varkan lived. But for now, the Alliance had achieved the impossible. They had turned the tide. The combined forces of humanity and the Kelari began to regroup, their ships coming together to survey the remains of the battlefield. The stars seemed brighter now, not just because of the debris from the Varkan fleet, but because of what had been achieved. Against all odds, two species that had once been enemies had fought side by side, and together they had won. General Renner turned to Tarlin, her face serious but filled with the first true spark of respect. We did it, together. Tarlin gave a slow nod. Yes, together. And now we prepare for what comes next. The war was not over, but the Alliance had proven one thing beyond all doubt. When two civilizations that once stood apart came together, they could change the course of the galaxy. That's all for today's adventure. If you enjoyed this thrilling tale of unity and survival, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Join us next time for more heart-pounding action and galactic intrigue. Thanks for watching, and remember, humanity may not be alone after all.